This is Community Radio Networks. And it is Tuesday, the 12th of March. We are now going to get you all the information that you need to take on the day today. Let's start with the world news. This is Community Radio Networks, the world news, read by Shabnam Matgil. Haiti's Prime Minister Ariel Henry has tendered his resignation just a little while ago following an emergency meeting of regional nations and appeal for calm as the country descends into chaos. Regional leaders of the Caribbean community have held the emergency summit to discuss a framework for a political transition, which the U.S. had urged to be expedited as armed gangs wreaked chaos amid repeatedly postponed elections. He is set to be replaced by a presidential council that'll have 2 observers and 7 voting members, including representatives from a number of political coalitions, the business sector, civil society, and 1 religious leader. A nightly curfew is in place until Thursday after armed gangs waged battle in the capital of Port-au-Prince over the weekend, and the worsening insecurity and uncertainty about financing are casting doubt on the prospect of an international security mission in Haiti. It is Haiti's Prime Minister who agreed to resign following weeks of mounting pressure and increasing violence in the impoverished country. It comes after these regional leaders met in Jamaica yesterday to discuss a political transition in Haiti. Mr. Henry is currently stranded in Puerto Rico after being prevented by armed gangs from returning home. In a video address announcing his resignation, he urged Haitians to remain calm. The U.S. military personnel airlifted some Americans out of the country's embassy in Haiti as the island nation spirals into violence. And as Ramadan commenced, global leaders united in recognizing the significance of the holy month and called for silencing the guns in Gaza. President Biden pledged international efforts to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza in his Ramzan message and committed to working tirelessly for an immediate 6-week ceasefire. Simultaneously, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres passionately appealed for peace in Gaza, urging all parties to honor the spirit of Ramadan by silencing the guns. Hezbollah launched more than 100 missiles at Israeli military sites in one of the Lebanon-based group's heaviest assaults in recent months. This morning, rocket barrage was in response to an Israeli strike on the Lebanese city of Baalbek that killed a person. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended his plan to expand Israel's military offensive into the southern city of Rafah, while his defense minister warned Hamas not to test Israel's resolve during Ramadan. Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to kill all of Hamas's top leaders as he says Israel has eliminated the group's number 4. Recent reports indicate escalating tensions in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as the Israeli army reportedly attempted to assassinate Hamas leader Marwan Issa. The IDF carried out an airstrike on a building believed to be his hiding place, and Hamas is investigating whether Issa was killed in the attack. Ranking behind only Gaza strongmen Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Def was the apparent target of the strike in the Nusrat camp. Israel and Hamas are not close to any deal on a cessation of hostilities in Gaza and releasing hostages, according to mediator Qatar, warning the situation remained very complicated. Palestinian Minister of Women's Affairs Amal Hamad has called on all women of the world to stand by Palestinian women as she spoke to journalists during the UN Commission on the Status of Women in New York. 9,000 women have been killed in Gaza, according to the Palestinian minister to the United Nations. The Iraqi resistance of Iraq claims to have targeted Israel's largest airport in Tel Aviv, intensifying tensions in the region. Images circulating depicting people seeking cover amid this drone attack. And the first ship with aid for Gaza has left the Cyprus port, loaded with 200 tons of humanitarian aid for Palestinians in the conflict-ravaged Gaza, has left from Cyprus's Larnaca port this morning. U.S. forces have said they destroyed an underwater drone and nearly 20 ballistic missiles in a series of strikes against Yemen's Houthi rebels who threatened this morning to step up their attacks in the Red Sea during Ramzan. Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthi groups fired missiles at a Liberian-flagged container ship in the Red Sea but did not hit the vessel. The Pentagon has said U.S. and coalition forces defeated a large-scale attack by Iranian-backed Houthis in the Red Sea, shooting down at least 28 drones. The escalated attack is one of the largest in the past few months. The almost daily phone calls have stopped months ago, and now the tensions between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu over Israel's war on Hamas have burst into the open as the two leaders bicker publicly. U.S. President Biden warned Israel against attacking the city of Rafah in southern Gaza as these ceasefire talks with Hamas remained deadlocked at the beginning of Ramadan. President Biden, meanwhile, has said there was no need for additional U.S. troops to bolster Poland's border ahead of a request from that country's head of state for more personnel and military equipment to ease worries over Russian aggression on NATO's eastern flank. Robert Hur, at the start of his special counsel probe into Joe Biden's handling of classified documents, was lauded as an experienced and fair federal prosecutor who was well-versed in handling high-profile and complex investigations. Then, after a year of near-total public silence, he released a damning report detailing the president's alleged previous mishandling of classified material. A former U.S. attorney appointed by then-President Donald Trump was met with resounding backlash from Democrats, including from Biden himself. As he steps into the halls of Congress to testify today, his background and how critics and allies of the president believe that may have seeped into his investigation is once again going to be thrust into the spotlight. The special counsel who impunged the president's age and competence in his report on how Joe Biden handled classified documents will himself be up for questioning today. Former President Trump has said that one of his first acts as president, if he wins in November, would be to free those charged and convicted of crimes related to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Peter Navarro, once an economic advisor to former President Trump, has been ordered to report to a Miami prison on the 19th of this month to begin serving a 4-month sentence for refusing to comply with the congressional investigation into the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The 74-year-old Peter Navarro, convicted last year on 2 counts of contempt of Congress, one for failing to produce documents related to the probe and another for skipping his deposition. A longtime Mar-a-Lago employee who is a central witness in the investigation into former President Trump's handling of classified documents is now speaking publicly because he believes that voters should hear the truth about his former boss and the case before the November elections. Brian Butler, who is referred as Trump Employee 5 in the classified documents indictment brought by special counsel Jack Smith, said in an exclusive interview that he doesn't believe the criminal case against Trump is a witch hunt, as the former president has claimed. The former president is expected to attend a hearing this Thursday in the federal criminal case involving his handling of classified documents in Florida, where his attorneys will argue the case should be thrown out. Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott is fighting back, filing a lawsuit against a woman he accuses of extortion. In the lawsuit, he claims that in January, lawyers sent a letter to him seeking a settlement of a potential claim for sexual assault. They claim that Prescott sexually assaulted their client in 2017 and asked for $100 million, and that she was willing to forego pursuing criminal charges along with disclosing this information to the public. His lawyers have now countersued, claiming that lies hurt and that he has never engaged in any non-consensual sexual conduct with anyone. The National Transportation Safety Board released key parts of its investigation into the November 2022 airshow disaster at the Redbird Airport here in North Texas. 2 vintage planes collided before thousands of spectators, sending 6 to their deaths. While the documents do not draw any conclusion about the collision, they make it clear that the Airbus was in charge of the airspace. The deadlock in Ukraine is shifting the momentum in the war there in Moscow's favor, according to U.S. intelligence agencies telling senators yesterday. Moscow has made continual incremental battlefield gains since late last year and benefits from uncertainties about the future of military assistance from the U.S. and allies. Ukraine risks losing significant ground to Russia this year, according to the head of the CIA, warning as Vladimir Zelensky announced he was building 1,000 kilometers of frontline defenses. A Ukrainian general who blew up the Kerch bridge with a drone boat in one of his country's most successful strikes of the war said he felt like a hunter as he guided the vessel into its target. A Russian military transport plane, meanwhile, with 15 people on board, has crashed this morning while taking off from an airbase in western Russia. Germany's foreign ministers confirmed that Britain and Berlin are discussing a weapons rotation or Ringtausch, which would allow more deliveries of long-range missiles to Ukraine. And under the proposal, Storm Shadow missiles from a UK stockpile would be sent to Ukraine and then in turn replenished with Taurus missiles from a German stockpile. The UK successfully conducted the tests of its first-ever laser weapon named Dragonfire, which can deliver a high-power laser over long ranges. President Emmanuel Macron faced criticism from French medical workers, political opponents, and the Catholic Church over a draft bill slated for debate in May that would allow assisted dying for certain terminally ill patients. And the European Union's executive arm will recommend that Bosnia-Herzegovina start accession talks in a major boost for the Balkan nations' bid to join the bloc. The European Commission is expected to announce the decision today. Turkey is looking to expand its cross-border military operation against Kurdish militants in Iraq as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan courts more nationalist voters ahead of this month's local election. And South Africa's ruling African National Congress has said that 6 officials facing accusations of corruption have been included on its list of candidates for this year's election, bringing more scrutiny on a party that already has had its reputation badly damaged by graft. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the world news on Community Radio Networks. Alex Carey scored a magnificent unbeaten 98 to drive Australia to victory over New Zealand by 3 wickets in a tense conclusion to the second test in Christchurch, sealing a 2-0 series sweep for the visitors. And England head coach Brendan McCallum has said that they will have to do some deep thinking about their approach after being exposed in the final 4 test matches in India, but is convinced their first series defeat under his watch will make them a better side. The 5-match series was billed as the biggest test of England's swashbuckling approach to Test cricket, which is built around an aggressive, fearless brand of batting. China's parliament today revised a law to effectively grant the Communist Party more executive control over China's cabinet, according to the State Council in Beijing, after cancelling the Premier's post-parliament news conference for the first time in 3 decades. Meanwhile, India today came down heavily on China for raising objections to Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to Arunachal Pradesh. India rejected the Chinese objections and has said that Arunachal is and will always be an integral and inalienable part of India. India and Russia are in discussions to collaborate on a range of activities, including research on controlled thermonuclear fusion and joint development of the transit potential of the Northern Sea route. And India has begun withdrawing military personnel operating surveillance aircrafts in the Maldives after the new pro-China president ordered them to leave. Well, last week, the Maldives signed a military assistance deal with China as they prepared to leave. India has successfully conducted its first test flight of a domestically developed missile that can carry multiple warheads, said Prime Minister Modi. And this missile is equipped with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. In a goodwill gesture, India has approved a special provision to make 7th-generation Indian origin Mauritians eligible for the Overseas Citizens of India card to connect them with the land of their ancestors, said President Draupadi Murmu in her address at the state banquet hosted by Mauritian Prime Minister Pravind Kumar Jagannath. She also announced that the Indian government will support the government of Mauritius in the redevelopment of the sacred Ganga Talao complex into a religious, cultural and touristic hub. The Delhi police and central paramilitary forces continue to maintain vigil in the national capital following the implementation of the Citizenship Amendment Act. The Delhi police, along with the central paramilitary force, today staged flag marches in Delhi's Jagatpuri and Kureji Khas areas. Assam Chief Minister Hemant Biswa Sarma has said that he will be the first to resign if even one person who has not applied for the National Register of Citizens in the state gets citizenship under the Citizenship Amendment Act. He made this declaration in response to the protests that have erupted across Assam following the implementation of the CAA. Protesters are concerned that lakhs of people will enter the state due to this new law. And a few hours after Manohar Lal Khattar resigned from his post, MP Nayab Saini has taken the oath as the Chief Minister of the state. Earlier today, he met the Governor Bandaru Dattatreya and resigned along with his cabinet minister. Nayab Singh Saini comes from the OBC community, and last year he was made the state president of the BJP in Haryana. Prime Minister Modi, along with over 30 delegates, witnessed the tri-service exercise Bharat Shakti in Rajasthan's Pokhran. Welcoming the guests, the Indian Army Chief General Manoj Pandey said, "Today, we are here to witness the display of the firepower capability of indigenous weapons, and the service will showcase the key equipment and weapons system." The exercise Bharat Shakti displays an array of indigenous weapon systems and platforms as a demonstration of the prowess of the country. Prime Minister Modi praised the soldiers and said, "The scene we saw today, the bravery of our 3 armies is amazing. this roar in the sky, this bravery on the ground, this victory cry echoing in all directions. This is the call of a new India. He was addressing the crowd at this tri-services exercise, Bharat Shakti, in Rajasthan's Pokhran. And today he said Pokhran has once again become a witness to the trinity of India's self-reliance, India's self-confidence, and India's self-pride. A light combat aircraft, Tejas, of the Indian Air Force has crashed near Jaisalmer in Rajasthan this morning during an operational training. While the pilot ejected safely, a court of inquiry has been ordered to ascertain the cause of that accident. Hockey India went with the tried and tested as it named a 28-core probables for the senior men's national camp to be held from the 12th to the 30th of this month at the Calender Stadium in Bhubaneswar. In a veiled attack on China, India strongly criticized its veto to block evidence-based terrorist listings at the UN Security Council. China had previously blocked India's proposal to designate Sajid Mir, a Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Toiba terrorist wanted for the Mumbai attacks, as a global terrorist. And Ms. Kamboj, India's permanent representative to the UN, argued for decision-making power through an open process, emphasizing the need for consensus among member countries. And the statement also reiterated India's call for the UN Security Council reforms. And U.S. Consul General Christine Hawkins has congratulated Punjab Chief Minister Maryam Nawaz on becoming Pakistan's first woman Chief Minister. 9 people have been killed and 2 others injured when a 3-story building collapsed on top of another in Multan following a gas cylinder explosion this morning. And it is Ishaq Dar, who has formally assumed the role as the 39th Foreign Minister of Pakistan, formally assumed his role this morning. And Chief of Naval Staff Admiral Naveed Ashraf has called on Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in Islamabad and discussed professional matters pertaining to the Pakistan Navy. Speaking at the Cabinet's subsequent first meeting, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif highlighted the massive economic challenges facing his administration and said that the first test of the new government was to rein in inflation and prices of food items, especially during the holy month of Ramzan, which starts. The PTI has decided to form a shadow cabinet in Punjab to monitor the provincial government's performance in each administrative department. The Punjab government today imposed a 2-week ban on all public visits, meetings and interviews at Rawalpindi's Adiala jail, citing security threats, a move decried by PTI leaders who deemed it a deliberate plan to stop them from meeting party founder Imran Khan, who is currently incarcerated in that facility. And the PPP and the JUIF have reached an agreement over supporting each other's candidates in the upcoming Senate by-election on the 14th of this month. Babar Azam made the difference with a crucial half-century to help Peshawar Zalmi secure a narrow 2-run victory over the Karachi Kings and a top 2 berth in the league stage of the HBL Pakistan Super League. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the world news for you today. I do have financial news, and that will be coming up for you shortly. Stay tuned right here with us. Let's get you now the financial news for today. And today, ladies and gentlemen, is Tuesday, the 12th of March, and you are tuned to Community Radio Networks. We'll get you all your financial news, and we always start with the foreign currency exchange rates. We have the Indian rupee this morning at 82.80, Pakistani rupee at 279.09, Bangladeshi taka at 109.73, the Sri Lankan rupee at 306.61, Nepalese rupee 132.54, the British pound at 0.78, the euro at 0.92, the Canadian dollar 1.35, the Australian dollar 1.52, Mexican peso 16.84, Chinese yuan 7.18, Japanese yen 147.91, the Russian ruble at 91.23, Thai baht 35.75, and the Turkish lira at 32.06. U.S. equity futures have gained, with European stocks ahead of keenly awaited U.S. inflation data that is right now high and will determine when the Federal Reserve finally pivots to monetary easing. Futures on the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq 100 rose 0.2% and 0.5% respectively. U.S. stock futures rising today, with tech eyeing this bounce back ahead of the key inflation print that will help set expectations for the timing of a Federal Reserve shift to cutting interest rates. Today, investors will digest one of the most important data points, and that's the Federal Reserve considering its next interest rate decision. Oil gained before a series of market reports and U.S. inflation data, which may provide direction for prices that have traded in a tight range this year. Brent futures edged towards $83 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate traded above $78 as European stocks and U.S. equity futures also rose. Bitcoin raced to an all-time peak close to 72,000 yesterday as the world's most popular cryptocurrency won further support on greater trading accessibility and dollar weakness. Bitcoin is sustaining the record-breaking run lifted by the unprecedented amounts of capital flowing into crypto products, as well as a looming reduction in the digital tokens supply growth. The original cryptocurrency reached that all-time peak of almost 72,881. The Biden administration yesterday proposed a $7.3 trillion budget for fiscal year 2025, a roughly $300 billion increase over the current fiscal year's estimated expenses. President Biden's budget proposal for 25 includes a $4.7 billion emergency fund for border security to enable the Department of Homeland Security to ramp up operations in the event of a migrant surge. The administration of President Biden finalized a rule requiring meat, poultry, or eggs labeled as a U.S. product to come from animals born, raised, slaughtered, and processed in the country. J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said he doesn't think the Federal Reserve should begin lowering interest rates by June and should instead wait for more clarity. Apple is already working on a new generation of the MacBook Pro powered by the yet-to-be-announced M4 chip, according to Bloomberg. This development comes a few months after the company introduced the M3 chip in the current MacBook Pro lineup and a week after the introduction of the new M3-powered MacBook Air models. Reddit yesterday revealed plans to raise up to $748 million in next week's planned IPO at a valuation of close to $6.5 billion. The IPO will mark the first U.S. social media offering since Pinterest's $10 billion debut in 2019. Elon Musk's AI startup xAI will open source Grok, its chatbot rivaling ChatGPT, this week, days after suing OpenAI and complaining that the Microsoft-backed startup had deviated from its open source roots. OpenAI has attacked Elon Musk, calling his claims of having an agreement to make the company non-profit incoherent in a court ruling. The ChatGPT maker was responding to a lawsuit that Elon Musk filed against the Sam Altman-led company for allegedly deviating from its original mission of being a non-profit firm to a for-profit company. Former President Trump said in an interview yesterday, "I consider Facebook to be an enemy of the people." Meta platform stock fell 4%. Meta's decline outpaced the 0.4% drop seen in the tech-heavy Nasdaq to start the week and served as perhaps the first reminder to investors riding the Magnificent Seven trade that election risk matters to them too. Airbnb has said that it's banning the use of indoor security cameras and listings on its site around the world by the end of next month. The San Francisco-based online rental platform said it is seeking to simplify its security camera policy while prioritizing privacy. The 2024 Oscars were the most watched in 4 years. The Jimmy Kimmel-hosted telecast on ABC averaged 19.5 million viewers, according to time zone-adjusted fast national ratings from Nielsen, and that's a 4% increase from a year ago. The 96th Academy Awards scored the biggest audience for any awards show since 2020, when that year's Oscars, held a month before the U.S. went into lockdown in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, drew 23.64 million viewers. A former Boeing employee known for raising concerns about the firm's production standards has been found dead in the United States. John Barnett had worked for Boeing for 32 years until his retirement in 2017. In the days before his death, he had been giving evidence in a whistleblower lawsuit against the company. United is facing safety concerns after 5 major equipment incidents this week, 3 of which happened in the last 2 days. United Airlines was forced to return to O'Hare Airport with a maintenance issue on Saturday. And then the 5th incident this week for Chicago-based airline, where 5 crew members and 149 passengers were on board an Airbus 320 to Salt Lake City when an oil warning light came on. If you usually save money by packing light for trips and making the most of your carry-on bag, one major airline may have a very unwelcome surprise for you in the coming weeks, and that's Southwest Airlines has made a potentially major change to their carry-on bag policy. Blankets, cross-body bags, fanny packs, pillows, and shopping bags now count as your personal item. So other additional items that formerly counted as personal items now count as your carry-on. Disneyland officials will make their case to the Anaheim Planning Commission for approval of a 10-year expansion project to make the iconic park more immersive for visitors. And Texas Governor Greg Abbott has submitted a request for a disaster declaration to the U.S. Small Business Administration, and this request covers Carson, Hemphill, and Hutchinson counties in the Texas Panhandle, the region suffering heavy damage in the past few weeks because of the series of wildfires. If the SBA grants the request for a disaster declaration, homeowners and business owners in the region would be eligible for low-interest loans to help them repair that fire damage. And the last few years have seen a massive influx of people moving to Texas, and the number of new residents doesn't seem like it's slowing down anytime soon. While many outsiders may look at moving to DFW, Austin, or Houston, you know, the big cities, the Lone Star State, has plenty of wonderful areas for people looking to make a move. A new study from USA Today looked at 52 different cities in Texas and analyzed them with 18 different metrics to determine just what the best cities to move to are in the state. And the survey found that Tyler to be the best city in Texas to move to, followed by Laredo, New Braunfels, Cedar Park, and Temple to round out the top 5. How much do you need to make in a year to comfortably afford a home mortgage in Dallas? A new report says it's $121,388. That's less than cities from Austin and Los Angeles, but more than cities including Houston and Chicago. And this analysis by Zillow shows the figure is up by more than $50,000 in just the last 4 years and has nearly doubled since 2018. And a typical home in North Texas now costs almost $367,000. A week of activities has started at the Clyde Warren Park to keep kids entertained during spring break, and the park is hosting theater, music, STEM, and other events out there. UBS has been getting the benefits of seasonality during the first quarter and is looking to narrow the gap to peers in the United States, according to the Swiss Bank CEO Sergio Ermotti. Many of Germany's train drivers have staged a 24-hour strike today in the latest installment of a long-running and bitter dispute over working hours with the country's main railway operator, while a walkout by cabin crew at Lufthansa has added to the disruptions for travelers. Renewed strikes by Lufthansa flight attendants expected to lead to the cancellation of a total of 1,000 flights today and tomorrow at Germany's Frankfurt and Munich airports. Thousands of doctors at the university hospitals in Germany have put down their stethoscopes and held rallies to demand higher incomes and better working conditions. Around 7,000 doctors from 23 university hospitals took part in the rallies. Meanwhile, South Korea's government has criticized senior doctors at a major hospital today for threatening to resign in support of the weeks-long walkouts by thousands of medical interns and residents that have disrupted hospital operations. 12,000 junior doctors in South Korea have been off the job for a month to protest a government plan to sharply increase medical school admissions. U.S. companies that joined the trade and investment mission organized by President Biden will invest more than $1 billion in the Philippines. This according to U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, who leads that delegation. The U.S. and Philippines alliance is ironclad, she said in a joint briefing by the U.S. group and the Philippine officials. China has cancelled another batch of U.S. wheat export shipments, adding to an already record number of cancellations that have weighed on Chicago futures. It is Chinese Premier Li Qiang who does not intend to hold a meeting with visiting foreign CEOs at the upcoming China Development Forum later this month. And Gautam Nair is preparing to ramp up production at his clothing factory in Gurugram, betting on a surge of orders from brands like Marks & Spencer's and Next as India pursues more free trade pacts with the rest of the world. Within 3 years, he expects Matrix Clothing Private Limited's exports to the European Union and the UK to more than double from the current level. Prime Minister Modi's government taking advantage of India's growing appeal as the world's fastest growing major economy and an alternative to China for global supply chains to clinch a number of free trade pacts. Sensex today climbed 165.32 or 0.22%, while the Nifty remained flat and closed at 22,335. The share of women investors in mutual funds has increased from 15% in 2017 to nearly 21% in December of last year. Shares of India's leading cigarette manufacturer ITC have dropped by 2.5% to touch a low of 399.45 on the Bombay Stock Exchange. And it is the shares of SpiceJet, the troubled airline, that witnessed a decline of up to 10% to reach the day's lowest point at 54.60 on the Bombay Stock Exchange this morning. A tulip in the Netherlands has been named after Indian-American diplomat Shefali Razdan Duggal, the U.S. ambassador to the country, for advocating for gender equity as it celebrated International Women's Day. Tulipa Shefali comes from the Maverick International's breeding program in St. Martin and grew out of a years-long project for strong and healthy tulips. Newly appointed Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb today laid out his singular agenda to focus on the implementation of much-needed reforms and secure a new deal with the International Monetary Fund to pull the economy out of a crisis in Pakistan. The selling of dollars to banks has fallen by $70 million last month, and the bears continue to dominate the Pakistan Stock Exchange and dragged its benchmark index down sharply by over 700 points in intraday trade today. Trading in the newly listed Mahana Islamic Index Exchange Traded Fund managed by the Mahana Wealth Limited has begun, and the government's decision to impose a ban on the export of onions and bananas has failed to bring any price relief for consumers. The Competition Appellate Tribunal has upheld an order passed by the Competition Commission of Pakistan against Procter & Gamble Pakistan for engaging in deceptive marketing practices. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the financial news for you this morning. And before I get you the final segment of our program, I would like to thank our sponsors of Community Radio Networks. Huge thanks going out to Discount Power, to Houston EB5, to the Ahluwalia Law Offices, the Wyndham Hotel in Irving, Digital X-Force, Kinzer Law, Mai Kulachi, Ruchi Palace, Shri Vimal, Vimal's Venue, Eggholic in Irving, Mystic Mandala, and Flash Brush Productions. Huge thanks going out to all of them, and I have the final segment of today's program coming up for you. Stay with me right here. Today, ladies and gentlemen, is the 12th of March, and I'm going to tell you some stories from the annals of history that happened on today's date. It was way back in 1776 in Baltimore and Maryland that a public notice appears in local papers recognizing the sacrifice of women to the cause of the revolution. Now, this notice urged others to recognize women's contributions and announced the necessity of taking all imaginable care of those who may happen to be wounded in the country's cause, urges us to address our humane ladies to lend us their kind assistance in furnishing us with linen rags and old sheeting for bandages. On and off the battlefield, women were known to support the revolutionary cause by providing nursing assistance, but donating bandages and sometimes applying them was only one form of aid provided by the women of the new United States. From the earliest protests against British taxation, women's assent in labor was critical to the success of the cause, and the boycotts that united the colonies against British taxation required female participation far more than male. In fact, the men designing the non-importation agreements generally chose to boycott products used mostly by women. Tea and cloth are perhaps the best examples of these products. While many know of the men who dumped large volumes of tea into the Boston Harbor as a form of opposition to the hated Tea Act, few realize that women and not men drank most of the tea in colonial America. Samuel Adams and his friends may have dumped the tea in the harbor, but they were far more likely to drink rum than tea when they returned to their homes. Conveniently, their actions served to deprive their wives, mothers, sisters, and daughters, not themselves. The colonists only resorted to an attempt boycott of rum in 1774 after Britain had closed the port of Boston. Similarly, when John Adams and other men in power thought it best to stop importing fine British fabrics with which to make their clothing during the protests of the late 1760s, it had little impact on their daily lives. Wearing homespun cloth may not have been as comfortable nor look as refined as their regular clothing, but it was Abigail and other colonial wives and homemakers, and not John and his fellow men, who were forced to spend hours spinning clothes to create their families' wardrobes. Thus, in 1776, when Abigail begged John to remember the ladies while drafting the U.S. Constitution, she was not begging a favor but demanding payment of an enduring debt. And it was on today's date in 1776 in Baltimore that a public notice appeared in local papers recognizing the sacrifice of women to the cause of the revolution for the first time. On the 12th of March in 1894, Coca-Cola is first sold in bottles. Though today there is almost nothing as ubiquitous as a bottle of Coca-Cola, this was not always the case. For the first several years of its existence, Coke was only available as a fountain drink, and its producer saw no reason for that to change. Originally developed as a non-addictive substitute for morphine and then marketed as a non-alcoholic temperance drink, Coca-Cola was invented by John Pemberton, a druggist in Columbus, Georgia, in 1886. It was soon popular throughout the region, and the rights to the brand passed to Asa Griggs Candler. Candler's nephew had advised him that selling the drink in bottles could greatly increase sales, but Griggs apparently wasn't interested. The first person to bottle Coke was Joseph Bidenhahn, owner of a candy store in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Correctly determining that bottles could boost sales, he put the drink into Hutchinson bottles, a common and reusable glass bottle that bore no resemblance to the modern Coke bottle, and he sent Candler a case, but Candler continued to stick with fountain sales. 5 years later, he finally sold the national bottling rights to Coke, excluding the right to bottle it in Vicksburg, to the two brothers from Chattanooga. Still convinced that bottling would not be a major source of revenue, he sold the bottling rights for $1 and reportedly never collected even that. The contract stipulated that a bottle of Coke would cost 5 cents and had no end date, a legal oversight that resulted in the price remaining the same until 1959. In 1915, the bottlers put out a call for a new design, one so distinctive that one could recognize it if it were in pieces on the ground or by feeling it in the dark. The winning design, produced by the Root Glass Company of Terre Haute in Indiana, gave the world the iconic contoured bottle as we know it today. And so it was on today's date in the year 1894 that Coca-Cola was first sold in bottles. And on the 12th of March in the year 1930, Indian independence leader Mohandas Gandhi begins a defiant march to the sea in protest of the British monopoly on salt, his boldest act of civil disobedience yet against British rule in India. The Britain Salts Act prohibited Indians from collecting or selling salt, which was a staple in the Indian diet. Citizens were forced to buy this vital mineral from the British, who, in addition to exercising a monopoly over the manufacture and sale of salt, also exerted a heavy salt tax. And although India's poor suffered most under the tax, Indians required salt. Defying the Salt Acts, he reasoned, would be an ingeniously simple way for many Indians to break a British law non-violently. So he declared resistance to British salt policies to be unifying them for his new campaign of Satyagraha, or mass civil disobedience. And on today's date, in 1930, he set out from Sabarmati with 78 followers on a 241-mile march to the coastal town of Dundee on the Arabian Sea. And there he and his supporters were to defy British policy by making salt from seawater. All along the way, he addressed large crowds, and with each passing day, an increasing number of people joined the Salt Satyagraha. And by the time they reached Dundee on the 5th of April, he was at the head of a crowd of tens of thousands. He spoke and led prayers, and early the next morning, walked down to the sea to make salt. He had planned to work the salt flats on the beach, encrusted with crystallized sea salt at every high tide, but the police had forestalled him by crushing the salt deposits into the mud. Nevertheless, he reached down and picked up a small lump of natural salt out of the mud, and the British law had been defied. At Dundee, thousands more followed his lead, and in the coastal cities of Bombay and Karachi, Indian nationalists led crowds of citizens in making salt. Civil disobedience broke out all across India, soon involving millions of Indians, and British authorities arrested more than 60,000 people. Gandhi himself was arrested, but the satyagraha continued even without him. The poet Sarojini Naidu led 2,500 marchers on the Dharsana salt works, which was 150 miles north of Bombay. And it was the next year that Gandhi was released from prison, later met with Lord Irwin, the Viceroy of India, and agreed to call off this satyagraha in exchange for an equal negotiating role at a London conference on India's future. In August that year, he traveled to the conference as the sole representative of the Nationalist Indian National Congress. The meeting was a disappointment, but British leaders had acknowledged him as a force that they could not suppress or ignore. India's independence, of course, was finally granted in 1947. He was assassinated 6 months later. In another story, on the 12th of March in 1933, 8 days after the inauguration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who gave his first national radio address, or a fireside chat broadcast directly from the White House for the first time. He began that first address simply, "I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking." He went on to explain his recent decision to close the nation's banks in order to stop a surge in mass withdrawals by panicked investors worried about possible bank failures. The banks would be reopening the next day, he said, and he thanked the public for their fortitude and good temper during the banking holiday. At that time, the U.S. was at its lowest point of the Great Depression, with between 25 and 33% of the workforce unemployed. But it was on today's date, 8 days after his inauguration, that he gave his first national radio address or fireside chat broadcast directly from the White House. And on the 12th of March in 1938, German troops marched into Austria to annex the German-speaking nation for the Third Reich. Austrian Nazis conspired for the second time in 4 years to seize the Austrian government by force and unite their nation with Nazi Germany. And Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg, learning of this conspiracy, met with the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler in the hopes of reasserting his country's independence, but was instead bullied into naming several top Austrian Nazis to his cabinet. All that happened on today's date in 1938, when the German troops marched into Austria to annex that German-speaking nation for the Third Reich. And then, ladies and gentlemen, it was on today's date in 1969 that the London Drug Squad appears at the house of George Harrison and Patty Boyd, with a warrant and drug-sniffing canines. Boyd immediately used the direct hotline to the Beatles' headquarters, and George returned to find his home turned upside down. He is reported to have told the officers, "You needn't have turned the whole place upside down. All you had to do was ask me, and I would have shown you where I keep everything." Without his assistance, the constables, including Sergeant Pilcher, who had directed the drug-related arrest of John Lennon the previous year, had already found a considerable amount of hashish. Harrison and Boyd were arrested, and as they were being escorted to the police station, a photographer began shooting pictures of that famous couple. Harrison chased after the photographer, with the cops trailing right behind him down the London street. Finally, the man dropped his camera, and George stomped on it before the officers subdued him. He and his model wife, who missed Paul and Linda McCartney's wedding that same day because of the arrest, were released on bail. A few weeks later, Harrison and Boyd were allowed to plead guilty. Despite the rather prodigious amount of hash recovered from their home, the authorities were satisfied that it was all for their personal use. They were fined £250 each and even had a confiscated pipe returned to them. 10 years later, Boyd married guitarist Eric Clapton, and Harrison sang and played at their wedding. Sergeant Pilcher, the man behind the raid, was convicted of planting drugs in other cases and went to jail in 1972. George Harrison died in November of 2001 after a struggle with cancer. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was a story from the annals of history that happened on today's date, which is the 12th of March, and it happened in the year 1969 when this happened right at George Harrison's home. The second version of Got My Mind Set on You by George Harrison.
Got my mind set on you, but it's gonna take money, a whole lot of spending money. It's gonna take plenty of money to do it right, child. It's gonna take time, a whole lot of precious time. It's gonna take patience and time to do it, 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 to do it right, child. I got my mind set on you. 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 And this time I know it's real. The feeling that I
On the 12th of March 1988, a sudden hailstorm prompts fans at a soccer match in Kathmandu in Nepal to flee. The resulting stampede killed at least 70 people and injured hundreds more. Approximately 30,000 people were watching this game between the Nepalese home team Janakpur and Mukti Jodha of Bangladesh at the National Stadium. A storm approached quickly and hailstones began pelting the spectators. When they panicked and rushed to the exits, they found the gates locked, apparently to keep people without tickets from entering the stadium. As fans continued to push forward towards the exits, there was no space for them to go. The victims of the stampede, unable to breathe, were literally crushed to death. The stampede in Nepal seemingly did little to prevent similar disasters. A year after the tragedy at the National Stadium, 96 people were crushed to death at a game between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest in Sheffield, England. Another 18 months later, more than 40 people were trampled to death at a game in Orkney in South Africa. Hail on its own can also be deadly. There are several recorded instances of hail crushing people's skulls due to its size and force. In Kostov, Russia, 23 people were killed in a single hailstorm as they attempted to save their livestock, and 22 were killed in Greece from hail the size of eggs. Nepal, of course, suffered an even worse disaster later the same year when an earthquake struck, killing 1,200 people and leaving thousands homeless. But it was on today's date in 1988 that this sudden hailstorm prompted these fans at the soccer match in Kathmandu to flee, and that resulting stampede killed at least 70 people and injured hundreds more. In response to the critical comments made about him by singer Natalie Maines in the run-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, it was President George W. Bush who offered this response. The Dixie Chicks are free to speak their mind. They can say what they want to say. Of the backlash, the Chicks, then known as the Dixie Chicks, were then facing within the world of country music. And President Bush added, they shouldn't have their feelings hurt just because some people don't want to buy their records when they speak out. This music-related sideshow to the biggest international news story of the year began on today's date in the year 2003, when the British newspaper The Guardian published its review of a Chicks concert at the Shepherd's Bush Empire in London 2 nights earlier.
Through their high school days, both
In that review, The Guardian's Betty Clark included the following line. Just so you know, says singer Natalie Maines, we are ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas.
out looking for a bright new world. Want
And that line quickly became fodder for a grassroots anti-Chicks backlash. Began with thousands of phone calls flooding country music radio stations from Denver to Nashville. Calls demanding that the Chicks be removed from the station's playlist. And soon some of the stations were calling for a boycott of the recent Chicks album and of their upcoming U.S. tour.
this makeup
Fellow country star Toby Keith famously joined the fray by performing in front of a backdrop that featured a gigantic image of Natalie Maines beside Saddam Hussein.
Earl walked right through that restraining order.
The economic and emotional impact of all this on the members of the Chicks is documented in the 2006 documentary Dixie Chicks, Shut Up and Sing.
From Atlanta on a red
In its opening sequence, one can see how popular and how far from controversial the Chicks were just prior to this controversy, when they sang the national anthem at the 2003 Super Bowl.
that Earl had to die.
The film also captures a scene in which the Chicks' own media handler is counseling Maines not to speak her mind too openly about President Bush in an upcoming interview with Diane Sawyer. In the year 2020, after a 15-year hiatus, the Chicks released a new album called Gaslighter. That same year, they announced they were changing their name to the Chicks, dropping the word Dixie.
Ain't it dark? Wrapped up in that tar, Earl.
And in one of the last stories that I have for today's date, the 12th of March, it was in the year 2020, after New York State and city leaders placed COVID-19 related restrictions on gatherings of more than 500 people, that the Broadway Theatre District announced it will go dark for an unprecedented 32 days. The longest shutdown for the artistic mainstay in its history, the closure would end up being extended to the end of May 2021, a year later, adding up to billions in tourism losses. High risk factors for theaters, according to the New York Times, included a typically older audience, often rife with tourists, along with cramped seating and an inability to practice social distancing in those spaces. There's no such thing as social distancing for actors. Our jobs sometimes require that we go to work and kiss our colleagues 8 times a week, said actress Kate Shindle, the president of the Actors Equity Association labor union. Although nobody wanted to close the theaters, at the same time people were starting to be scared to work, and with good reason. 31 productions were showing on Broadway when the ban took effect, and a handful, including Disney's musical version of Frozen and Tina Fey's Mean Girls, were closed permanently due to the closure. Previously, the longest the district was dark was 25 days in the year 1975 during a musician strike. Following the September 11 terrorist attacks, Broadway was shuttered for 2 business days only. But it was on today's date, just 4 years ago, after New York State and city leaders placed COVID-19 related restrictions on gatherings of more than 500 people, that the Broadway Theatre District announces it will go dark. Those were some of the stories that happened on today's date, which is the 12th of March. Tuesday morning temperatures have been in the 50s with passing high clouds, but it's going to be a very sunny and beautiful day today with the highs in the mid 80s. Tomorrow is partly cloudy, windy, and much warmer. We may touch even the mid 80s. Most of Thursday looks decent with highs near 80, but a strong cold front arrives later in the evening, bringing a good chance of showers and storms out ahead. And some of these storms might just become severe, so watch out for those. Friday and Saturday look partly to mostly cloudy and much cooler in the 60s. St. Patrick's Day looks decent under a partly cloudy sky on Sunday. Afternoon highs topping out into the upper 60s, which is the average for this time of the year. I have huge thanks going out to all the supporters of CRN, Community Radio Networks. You can check out our website, which is crn.guru, and we are live on that as well as on YouTube every morning. And after that, you can hear the show anytime you want on 15 different platforms where you listen to podcasts. Huge thanks going out to Discount Power, to Houston EB5, to the Ahluwalia Law Offices, the Wyndham Hotel in Irving, Digital X-Force, Kinzer Law, My Kalachi, Ruchi Palace, Shri Vimal, Vimal's Venue, Eggholic, Mystic Mandala, and Flash Brush Productions. We have lots of holy festivals happening. 2 of them are happening by Mystic Mandala, which is on the 16th this weekend and the 23rd. Please do check out details at DallasFestivalOfColors.com. The Texas Women's Society is presenting the McKinney Asian Festival, and that's happening in the McKinney, of course. It's a cultural food, live performances, fun activities, and Lantern Walk Festival happening from 11 to 6 on the 23rd at the Dr. Glenn Mitchell Memorial Park on Louisiana Street in McKinney. And also, SABA, the South Asian Bar Association, is having their 2024 Holy Festival celebration along with the Dallas Asian American Bar Association, DABA, and that's on Sunday the 24th from 2 to 4 at the Breckenridge Park Gazebo at 5300 Renner Road in Richardson. A Festival of Colors co-hosted by SABA and DABA at the Breckenridge Park in Richardson. Also, the Success Door, supporting the Pledge Campaign Foundation, presents Fly, First Love Yourself. It's season 4, happening on the 6th of April at the Dewey Men's Center in Louisville from 4 to 8. And TIPS, the Texas Indo-American Physician Society, having their annual 5K, 10K run and walk on the 7th of April. It's a Sunday, and it's at the Oak Point Preserve on Spring Creek Parkway. Online registration is required at runsignup.com. The TIPS also this year is starting and inaugurating this mentorship program to help students of Indian and South Asian origin. This is for medical students in the North Texas region and graduates of Indian medical schools who are looking for residency positions, fellowships, clinical and research observerships, and jobs. For those interested, you can send an email to mentorship@TIPS NEC. NEC is the Northeast chapter. tipsnec.org. There are going to be on the 8th of April scores of people across parts of North America who are going to gather outdoors at the same time to witness this year's most anticipated celestial event, a total solar eclipse that will turn daylight into darkness for up to 4 minutes and 28 seconds. While the eclipse itself isn't that rare, one takes place every 18 months or so, being able to witness one is a far less common occurrence, and on average a total solar eclipse can be seen from some point on the planet only once every 375 years. There are a few lucky locals there, however, that have been treated to the spectacle more frequently. 7 years ago, a solar eclipse with a 70-mile wide path of totality stretched from Lincoln Beach in Oregon to Charleston, South Carolina. And in that eclipse's path of totality, which refers to the path in which the moon lines up perfectly with the sun, the moon's shadow completely covered the sun for a maximum of 2 minutes, 40 seconds. So watch out for this one on the 8th of April. The business plan competition brought to you by the U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce is happening on the 12th of April. You can get more information on the Chamber's website, which is usicoc.org. Pratham Dallas Fort Worth Gala is happening on the 20th of April at the Omni Frisco Hotel, and the special guests are Vidya Vox, the YouTuber and singer, and Krish Dhanam, the speaker and author. Changing lives, transforming communities. That is this year's gala theme, and we're thrilled to invite you to the 2024 Pratham Dallas Fort Worth Gala, an extraordinary evening dedicated to empowering children and young people in India to transform their lives and their communities at the Omni Frisco Hotel on the Saturday, the 20th of April. And please do mark your calendars and join us for this unforgettable evening of exquisite dining, inspiring company in a cause that truly matters. 360 Shows, Diamond Productions, 24/7 Entertainment are presenting Neetu Chandra's Umrao Jaan Ada musical play, a West End musical play in Broadway style. It's going to be in Dallas on the 26th and 27th. We should be having 3 shows, and tickets are available at Ticketmaster. And for the first time in American television history, PBS stations across the U.S. will show a new documentary film on Swami Vivekananda called America's First Guru, and that too, a first man Indian origin documentary filmmaker. This will be happening in May, and I'll have details of it coming up as we get closer to that date. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the information I have on the events for the moment. We have plenty more that as we get closer to the dates, we'll bring them to you right here on Community Radio Networks. For those of you who would like to reach me directly, I'd like to give my direct number, 214-675-1754. 214-675-1754. And that's our show for today. Have a beautiful Tuesday. It is the 12th of March today.